Hey everybody, this is going to be the part 2 of the SketchUp introduction, where I'm not going to cover modeling in this case, but I am going to cover materials and the sort of style outputs that you can do. So I mentioned a few things, sort of basics on materials in the first video I made. But by default, we have the material editor on the right side here, so it's in your default trays. So again, if you don't have your default trays, you can turn them on here in the window. If you click the house, it'll take you to all the textures that you have in your model. In general, you want to try to keep this list relatively small. One, it can start to hamper your load times and make the whole modeling process go a bit slower and sluggish, especially for rendering, as the rendering engines tend to have to load in each and every one of those textures, which can really slow things down. The next, oftentimes it gets a little confusing. You just get too many and it's hard to keep organized. So if you click here, we can see that there's a bunch of materials that are already loaded into SketchUp. I find the colors palette to be by far the most useful. Whenever I'm creating a new material, I simply go and grab a random color and we'll start painting it in the scene. So in this case, I went into this box here and I'm just going to paint the whole thing this bright pink. Now I thoroughly intend to change the color, but I just needed a starting point just to paint it somewhere so that it appears on my list of materials in the model. So I'm going to rename this now, and let's call this brick. Actually, let's not do brick. Let's do brick. And now I'm going to go to edit, and I'm actually going to load in another texture. So this is where you can actually make use of the same textures that we had for the last assignment. So in this case, I'm just going to grab my brick texture that I have here and hit apply. And you can see here, it's now applied this brick. Now we can set the size here. So currently it's set to be 1 foot. I know these happen to be Roman bricks, so I'm going to make them 3 feet. Because that will give a realistic size here. And pretty quickly you can see it just applies. If you ever want to rotate a texture, so if you double click and click on a surface itself, you can right click and do texture, position, and then with these tools here, you could right click again and do rotate 90, rotate 90 again, or you can start the red little tag here will give you a starting point. So if you want to make sure a texture starts at a corner, you could do that. This is especially helpful if you're, say, trying to align brick on a corner like this. I would probably want to come in and do texture position, and again, align these textures to start at the same place. You can see here that looks a lot more logical of a corner. This is not always necessary. I think a texture like this can be a nice thing to add, especially for this assignment, because just having the little bit of line weight here goes a long way to sort of give something that distinguishes this volume from the rest of the model. And again, all of this texture is just lines on a white background. These are very easy to make in Illustrator if you're interested in doing so. Make sure you unselect the select tool or the edit tool so that you don't continue editing accidentally, as it's something I frequently do. We could also adjust the opacity, so that's down here. So if we want to make this into a transparent surface, we could, but I'm going to leave that as opaque. We could also adjust, add in some color here. It tends to do weird things with textures when you do this, so it's not always a good idea. But we could make it into, again, it does weird things when you make adjustments to textures, so it's not always the right move. Let's see. Just curious. Yep. Yeah, so they all tend to do that. But that can be a great way to add some texture in. Oops. So oftentimes you'll see I tend to get lost inside of buildings, and then the best way out is sometimes just zooming until you get out. The zooming is just using the middle mouse button, the rolly wheel. So that's kind of basics of adding and applying textures. So in general, you set a sort of universal scale here. If you need to change it per object, you can go into that object and then go into the surfaces and change it that way. But that's going to be more or less what we're going to do with textures right now. We're going to spend the bulk of our time looking at styles. So in styles, I always just continue editing the same one and then making new ones based on it. The default one that I have currently set up is the architectural design style. However, looks like I've, we can go to default styles and you can see there's several here. There's a shaded, if we just click on any of these, some of them will change the background, some of them have wireframe, woodworking style. There are some really strange ones in here that will change the edge quality. Most of these, I think, don't look very good. They attempt to replicate sort of a hand-drawn look, but to me, I think just end up looking kind of cheesy and also very sort of predictable. A lot of people have used these before on a lot of different renderings, so they don't necessarily look new or innovative or anything. They look like something has been done a million times. Although some of them can look, you know, they can do some pretty crazy things. I don't know why or what scenario you'd ever want to use this particular style for, but, you know, people make these. And basically you have full control over the styles. So we can start off with the default shaded style right here and edit it to look like any of the ones we just looked at. So under edit, we have these 5 boxes up top here. The first controls edges. So in general, usually you're going to leave edges on. If we turn it off, you can see that we just see surfaces without edges, but SketchUp tends to work really well with edges on. Now there's going to be a time and place where you may want to turn these off, and I'll go over that as we're setting up for the specific styles. Next is profiles, and that's essentially outlines around things. So you can see here, we get a thicker line around the outside of objects. We can have profiles without edges or edges without profiles. The rest of these I find to be increasingly unnecessary. So extensions will extend your lines beyond sort of an architectural drafting style that you might see. So you can see here, basically all the edges get extended beyond. Again, it's a graphic thing. There's not really any technical reason why you would ever need to do this. But if for some reason you like having these extra edges, you can add them in. By default, they're all the same color. However, you can do them by material or by axes. I'm just going to leave them all same color. Next, you have surface quality, or surfaces. So we have here the default colors, and this is the sort of default front color as the positive side of your normal, and the default back color, that's the negative side of your normal. So we could make this into something much more obvious, like a red color. And you can see here, when we see normals, which we now, since we're looking into this pool, we see there's a lot of normals here. That's because when I had painted this pool, I had painted the outside of the surface and not the inside. So I'm going to go back to my materials real quick to fix this. And I'm going to use the eyedropper to make sure I get the right one. So it got the color here, and I'm just going to call this water so I can keep track of it later on. And now to get this to look good all the way through and not just on the outside, I'm just going to go inside this material. Select everything, or not this material, inside the water, but basically paint the inside face. So now the water, as I've modeled it, has everything with the same paint color to it. Okay, so we also have a couple different styles down here. So we have the basic wireframe, which will make essentially all of the faces disappear and all we see are the lines. We have hidden line, which basically makes all surfaces white. The next, which is basically going to get rid of textures, but just show tones, so shaded tones. Next we'll show textures. And the final one just shows the normals. So this is really useful if you're trying to problem solve and you're trying to figure out why something's looking weird. All of these have their normals in the right direction, so everything looks white. If we were to go into the ground, you can see it's all red because our normals are all over the place, but that's where they should be, in the ground. So I'm going to go back to this hidden line here. And the last one is X-ray, which just kind of makes everything a bit transparent. Again, sort of a graphic thing, can be really useful for modeling too if you're trying to make alignments. But you may or may not want this on. It does tend to slow things down as you're showing a lot more on screen. So next we have the background. So we could set a background color. So if we want everything to be crazy red, you can see here, I'm going to set, so we have tones turned on. We can set a ground versus a sky if we wanted to do that. That's the sort of horizon line you see there. Sometimes that's nice just to keep yourself organized. So if you're rotating around and you don't realize you're upside down, it can help you figure out which way is up. So that's something. Next is watermarks, which we're not really going to cover. And finally, the last one, one of the more useful ones, this is basically what we can see. So I mentioned before that we can make a section plane. So let's make a section across the site real quick. It wants us to name it. I'm not going to. If we want to have the section cut affect the model but not see the section, we could turn off section planes. And now you can see that we get a really clean look. We see the cut, but we don't see the section planes themselves. We can also do the opposite if we wanted to have the section cut in the model living in here, but not necessarily cutting anything that we can see. As I mentioned, SketchUp 2020 has section fills or poche. So you can see the difference here, really radically improved. This only works if you are modeling the way I've suggested, or effectively you're modeling in solids because you're creating enclosed objects on all sides. And there's some other things here that are going to be useful. So, right now there's a section. The section gives a thicker line at the cut, so you can adjust that here. There are some other things here. These are the ones I tend to mess with most. Again, section fill, if we wanted to do something more unique, like an orange fill, always my default, could make that really show up well. So let's say we maybe got to a view that we particularly liked, like we were interested in this, and we wanted to save that view. Those are done with scenes. So if you go up to View, Animation, Add Scene, you can, it'll ask if you've adjusted your styles, you can save as a new style, update the selected style, or do nothing. I'm going to update because I've made adjustments that I liked, but you may want to save as new. Don't need to know too much about that, just know that those are useful things. But basically, if I go to my original scene, which I had set up, which is I think the one that I used, you can see the sections aren't visible, because when I originally set up the scene, and I did this before the video started, I didn't have sections turned on, and neither in this one. However, in the last one I did, the section appears. So that could be really useful. So setting up views that have sections and other views that don't. We can also, I believe we can go to play animation, in which case it'll just move between your set scenes. This might be something you do for a presentation with a client or something. Again, it's sort of raw SketchUp, so it's not a rendered view per se, but it does allow you to sort of show off a series of images of your model. So I'm going to go to the view that I used for my demonstration. So to get out the layers that I'm suggesting everyone should get out, I'm actually going to go down and open up the Shadows tab. And this button here will turn on shadows. And you can see the shadows look pretty nice in SketchUp. They are controlled by time of day. We also can geolocate the model to make sure we're getting shadows accurate to our particular part of the world. And this is done by going to File and down to Geolocate and do Add Location. And this is actually a way that you can get more information than you can. I just want these things to go away. Dismiss. Okay. So we could do, well, it's already on Cincinnati. It's using Google Earth data. So we could go to our site if I can find it. That's interesting. That's the stadium being built. So our site being right here. And we could do select region. And we could hit import. And it will actually bring in the physical site. Now, if you don't want this, you can always eliminate it. And you can see here, it is just a flat 2D plane. I believe we can make it go and become three-dimensional. Is it under geolocate, show terrain? And it's barely not flat, but it gives you a very rough estimate of what the actual terrain is on site. But it will allow you to keep shadows accurate. So if we look here, these are the accurate shadows for time of day, as long as you are aligned correctly north, south, east, west. So you can use this as a reference and see here that we're aligned pretty much to the same grid, so this should be accurate. But we could set different times of day, different times of the year. Let's see if we can get pretty smooth animation between times of day. Having shadows on will slow down your model, so usually you do not keep them on. But they are a great way to do a shadow study and just get an idea of what you're looking at. And they can look pretty good. So we're going to go back to our sort of default view. So the first thing we're going to want to get, and we're going to save out, is going to be just the line work. So I'm going to go to Style, going to go to my first option, turn on edges. I'm actually going to keep profiles on, but instead of giving it thickness, I'm going to set it to 1. So we have edges on and we have profile set to 1. Next, we're going to go to face settings and we're going to go to the hidden line mode. And next, we're going to go to the background settings, turn off the sky, and set the background to be pure white. And we have now made the lines that we're going to export. To export, we just go to File, and then we go down to, oops, is it under Edit? No, it's File. Export 2D graphics. And we'll want to set this as a TIFF, of course, TIFF being the highest quality, and give it a name, lines. Now when we export, well, I thought it was going to ask us for setting changes, but it doesn't. So you have to do that ahead of time. So we want to actually make sure we're setting this to be a nice high quality export. So again, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm just going to save over that since I didn't hit the options down here first. So for this, because we're not actually rendering, we don't have to worry as much about how long it takes to do an output. So I'm going to set my width to be 5,000 pixels and let the height be whatever it's going to be, because it's going to use the view size as a sort of ratio. So it's always going to export the same ratio as the screen that you're looking at. You can do transparent background if you want. It doesn't actually matter. That's up to you. We certainly don't need it for lines, but make sure this is set to 5,000 and just hit OK. And then we can export this. Now I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it again. So this would be one layer. The next we're going to do is shadows. So I'm going to go and turn off my profiles. And actually I'm going to turn on my shadows real quick, or I'm not going to see anything. And turn off my edges. So what we should see now is just the shadows and nothing else. So I just want to do the same process. Go to Export, 2D Graphic, and now the larger size you export this, the longer it will take. So 5,000 pixels took my computer about 5 seconds. If we went to 10,000 pixels, it would be maybe a minute or two, and it also depends on the complexity of your model and what you're showing and a bunch of other factors, but just know that that can change. So next, I'm going to turn, let's do edges back on, and this time I'm going to turn X-ray on, so that will be under Face Settings, X-ray. So this just gives you a kind of transparent look through things that often could be a nice additional layer. Sometimes it's necessary, or sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. It's totally preference, but just export it just so you have it. And we'll just name that X-ray. And give it the 5 seconds or so it takes to export that. And I'll turn X-ray off. And now I'm going to go to display the shaded mode. And we're going to go and turn our edges off. So now we should only get shaded colors. Now, in order to make this really flat, I don't want to get shading where we see the underside is darker than something else. I'm going to go to this button here that says use sun shading, turn that on, and I'm going to bring the darks all the way up and the lights all the way down, or vice versa. Yeah, the first way. And essentially what you see here is the image becomes very flat looking, which is what we want, because we just want the color in each area as they've been assigned as a material, and we don't run anything else. So we do the same thing here, export this. Oops, not 3D model. Export a 2D model. And we'll just call that flat. I don't remember what I called it in the assignment sheet. I think it was tones. Yeah, just tones. Okay, and I think that's actually all I've asked you to export. Yeah, so what you'll do now is open this up in Photoshop, which I actually already have open right here. And you can see the composition that I made. So I'm going to go through the basic layers of what I have here. I'm going to turn everything off. So I started off with a white canvas. I actually put a gradient on it. You don't have to do this. I was just trying to make something a little bit more stylistic that I applied a sky to. You can see here the sky is actually cut out. Now we don't have the rendering settings from the alpha channel from V-Ray or Thea or anything like that. I'm gonna hide the keyboard real quick and the mouse. We don't need these for Photoshop. But what we do have is the line layer itself, which looks something like this. So essentially what I can use is the magic wand tool in its sort of default mode and just use the lines with continuous turned on to select areas. So I could select out the entire sky area, which is what I had done. Just selecting the areas where I want the sky to appear. You may want to keep a fairly low tolerance here. 15 will work fine, but a lower might be better. But essentially just do this until you've selected the whole sky. And that's how I created the layer mask that looks like that. It's not perfect. We can see through some wood areas there, but it was good enough for what I was doing. Next, I just created a simple white area and cut out a circle. That was simply done by, I think I just pasted white onto a layer and then used the selection tool, one of these I think, made a selection in a circle. However I did it, doesn't matter too much. I think I actually might have made a shape and then used that shape as a selection somehow. And then use that selection to essentially erase away the inner circle. Next we have the tones layer, which I actually have set to an overlay so that it kind of melds a little bit with the gradient behind it. Again, I was going for something a little bit stylistic here. You can see what happens if you turn it up or turn it down. It kind of disappears a bit. It adds some definition. The shadows are set to multiply at a sort of lower opacity. So you can see here. And again, this is why we're separating the layers out. So we have full control in Photoshop to be able to make these incremental adjustments to each of these layers. And then this is the standard layer, or standard lines, which I set to multiply. Probably turn down the opacity again. Don't want it to be too strong. We could do the same thing for the X-ray layer, which, if we turn on, we can start to get a sort of three-dimensional look at things. It's a sort of weird aesthetic, but sometimes it's a nice thing to add in. It can add a little bit more detail or depth to an image, or just a suggestion of depth. And then, of course, some people. These are just some silhouette figures that have a little bit of an outline to them. And that's it. That's all that was done for this image. So again, I think as long as you're combining all the layers in Photoshop and adding 3 people of any sort, silhouettes are fine. Make some adjustments, have some fun. Again, maybe do a gradient background and see how it affects things, add a sky in, keep it simple, but make an image. Could be something like this, could be something different, could be more realistic or less. Just try something out. Okay, so that's going to be it for this one. Let me know if you have any other questions. Thanks.